Welcome back, viewers at home. Now, mental health is a crucial issue affecting individuals of all ages, but the challenges faced by the youth are particularly pressing. In South Africa, depression and anxiety among school-aged children is on the rise, impacting not only their academic performance, but also their overall well-being. Now, as we observe World Mental Health Day from October the 8th until the 10th of October, it is quite vital to shed light on these issues as well as explore solutions for the future. Now, joining me to help me understand as well as discuss more in detail the issue around mental health in people or individuals who are still in school or the youth is Ronald Abvajee. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you so much for joining us once again.
Wa alaikum salam, and it's always good to be with you.
Now, Ronald, we can, before we start talking about the insides of, mental health, its implications and so forth, I would like for you to just start us off on the overview on the current state of mental health in school-aged children as well as teenagers.
When we look at mental health, it has been said from different organizations in South Africa, including SADAG, the South African Depression and Anxiety Group, that adults, firstly, 1 in 3 adults at some point in their life will experience mental health vulnerability. When we look at teenagers and children, we do know that it's compounded as well. We do know that those stats, you could almost mirror them in the reality of what our teens are facing. Now, when we're talking about teens and young adults, we're not talking just in urban areas. We're also talking in outlying areas, rural areas, etc. in South Africa. When we look at it from that basis, we say to ourselves, is mental health a problem, or is mental illness a problem, or both actually the same, two sides on the same coin of concerns and issues that impact the functioning and the ability of that young person to thrive and flourish in every facet of their lives?
Now, I want to also understand the prevalence of, I earlier on in the intro, I spoke about the, mental health issues like that of anxiety, depression. I want to know from you, how prevalent is this in, school-aged children as well as the youth in these current times?
I mean, it's very prevalent. So when we're looking at actual numbers, it all depends on what is clinical, what is diagnosed, and what is, of course, measured. But what we do know is the subset on what we identify and observe within not just the clinical data, but we look at the sentiment data as well, and that for me is even more scary. The reality is that our young school children and young adults are faced with the following. The rates of anxiety are increasing exponentially. The rates of stress increasing exponentially. The rates of unhealthy stress or distress increasing exponentially. The rates of depression increasing exponentially. The rate of suicide is increasing exponentially. The rate of bullying, especially cyberbullying, is increasing exponentially. And all of that, if we look at it, is leading to what the world has identified as the loneliness epidemic. Because the withdrawal, the isolation compounds this as well, and digital platforms don't really enhance that. Because when you're sitting gaming, sitting on your phone, sitting on a device in your room, you are separating yourself from what social interaction could be, or from family and friends, and also what those that love you and understand you as a young kid could also identify what certain concerns, parameters are being broached that are not in your normal standard of behavior. And that leads to an increased prevalence of all of those mental health conditions.
Ronald, when we talk about, mental health issues, especially around children and the youth, you find that parents tend to be quite, I don't want to say not understanding, but it's a matter of you have a home, you have food. What else is that really is driving you to a point of now you're saying you're depressed, or now you're saying you're not okay, because all is provided for you, and I should be the one stressed because I'm the one who is your carer and your caregiver, and these are my concerns. In your view, what would you say are the major contributors to, mental health illness amongst school-aged children and that of the youth in South Africa?
So there's a difference between mental health and mental illness. Mental illness are clinical disorders that are diagnosed by psychiatrists and professionals, and you get put a particular treatment regimen. Depression, anxiety, bipolar, personality disorders, schizophrenia as well, and a couple of others. It could also be because of a brain issue. You could have had an accident or a developmental issue as well. Mental health is something that we all have, and often fluctuates. When we're distressed or stressed, we feel highly, our mental health is a little bit low compared to where it should be, and so forth. So it's not a clinically diagnosed thing. But you mentioned parents are often, or caregivers are often saying that why are you dealing with these mental health issues? Because you have a home and you have food on the table. There's a difference between a house and a home. A house is 4 walls and a roof, and a home has got safety and a safety factor to it. Now, even if you have either or, it doesn't mean that the child is feeling safe at work or on their way to work. We know recently the Ekurhuleni rapist was sentenced, and over 120, 30, 40 young women, young girls were raped.
Most in their homes as
in
well.
their homes, and they were on their way to and from school. So safety is not just about your home, it's about, are you physically safe? And if you are physically safe, are you then emotionally safe? Do you feel comfortable talking to the caregivers about, this is what happened at school and I don't feel okay? Are you giving those kids the language to utilize? You might call it depression. Others might call it uyahlanya, because they don't understand what depression is, right? Others might call it, I'm just stressed. But do you give them the ammunition to say that, does it feel like inside of you there's a balloon that is blowing up all the time, and it doesn't blow up anymore till eventually, it pops? How do you feel? Now that'll give you an indication of what they are dealing with symptomatically, either mentally or emotionally, but you cannot diagnose it or label it. So we need to give our kids the language and give them the opportunity to identify that something is not good, bad, right, or wrong, because they're sitting in a space with you where you are not judging them as a caregiver. So you are there to understand and listen, and then, of course, try to be understood or get them the right support and help. But often what you just mentioned as a caregiver, it's a very selfish lens. I give you this, I give you that, and you must do this. So you are already adding expectations onto that young kid. Schools are adding expectations. Friends, there's peer pressure. There's so many different things happening. My friend's got a bike and I want an electric bike. My friend says they've got this and I want this. So the children are being faced with a lot of pressures in all facets of their lives. So as parents and caregivers, are we creating a safe space for our children to express, to de-stress and to decompress, and for them to be open with us in conversation?
Now, Ronald, I think as stakeholders, meaning parties in schools and out of schools, as parents as well, what role do we then come in and play in terms of curbing the conversations around the misunderstanding around mental health awareness, in terms of, as you mentioned now, and thank you so much for giving us the clarity when it comes to mental health as well as mental illness, where now how do we come in and become a solution to whatever is faced by the youth or school-aged children in these current times?
What we need to do is, and especially when you look at the different stakeholders involved in a child's life. So at home, it's your caregiver, and in that space there's a particular role to play. A role of fundamental basics, foundational principles, what's right, what's wrong, that shouldn't be relegated elsewhere. More often than not, there's a spiritual component as well. And whether it be a church, a mosque, a temple, whatever it may be for you that is spiritual, there's that influence as well. And at school, when you look at the school environment, teachers need to become aware of identifying different patterns in behaviors, but be careful not to label or diagnose, as we are not qualified to do as such if you are a teacher. So you identify certain parameters of, okay, this is a different behavior. I'm noticing marks are changing, things are happening, more snappy, withdrawn, etc. Most schools do have counselors, and if they don't, there are professional helplines available, such as SADAG, etc., that are available for you to reach out to and get professional counseling support for the teacher. But of course, with children, there's different rules that then apply. So my fundamental belief is, like workplaces, wellness programs at school are important to give teachers the mental health first aid opportunity to contain rather than diagnose. And then, of course, we need a structured program to intervene that is not just treating a symptom, but drilling into the root cause and giving children the tools and the skills that they need to add language to it. What do they identify as a safe space? And then, of course, help them build emotional and mental fitness if there's no clinical diagnosis that is needed.
As much as we sort of acknowledge the economic disparities among fellow South Africans, we tend to also acknowledge the fact that even in schools, there are those disparities, as you mentioned now. There are some schools who have counselors, and there are some who don't have. And I think in the lack of, they don't probably all of them know which other avenues they can explore in terms of, being the solution in assisting some of these young individuals. Would you say that holistically speaking, are schools in South Africa equipped in addressing some of these challenges that come with the, conversations and the awareness around mental health as well as mental illness within schools?
No.
And how do we go about now initiating that?
And let me share with you. So in my studies, I did my degree in physiology and biochemistry, psychology as well, and then I did my human movement sciences honors and physical education. So I spent some time teaching to understand how do you teach. And I went to schools. And part of it is that the skill set that the teachers get are not like normal professionals in accounting and medical fraternities, where they have to get CPD points, continual professional development points. So are you being kept abreast with the latest changes and what's happening in methodology and so forth? An example, I had a beautiful conversation with the MD of Lira, a wellness business, and they were saying to me how important creativity is, and creativity in schools in particular and workplaces, because that is ultimately the first intelligence, because creativity brings in a new realm of approaching your being and of course tapping into yourself and your inner world as a child. So with that being negated or neglected in school, and it's focused mainly on compliance, our schools are teaching kids how to parrot, fashion, learn. Our schools are not teaching kids how to analytically digest information and apply it practically and have an opinion. So schools, there's a lot of work to be done in schools, and I think that we are getting there in pockets. But the fundamental basis, the well-being of our children needs to be looked after, because they cannot scale in their lives if it's not looked after. If well-being and mental health alone costs the South African economy, and this is working people in South Africa, 161 billion rand. What is the cost to the children and the future of our country? I say it's 10x that if we don't look after mental well-being in schools today. And this is where communities also need to step up and step in.
Now, as a teacher tuning in this evening after what you have just shared when it comes to how well equipped are South African schools in tackling, mental well-being, how can they start initiating some of these programs or activities that will not only wait for us to be equipped, but being proactive in terms of being the ones who create those platforms where we work against such mental, disorders, if I can say so?
Well, it depends on the school as well and the structure, and it stems from the leadership. So it's about lobbying the principal to come on board so that it's a combined effort, not in isolation and pockets, number one. Number two, and the same thing applies to workplaces. If the leadership does not buy in through action into well-being in the workplace and mental health in the workplace, it'll be an amazing thing on paper, but lousily experience. Colleagues will not experience that in the best way possible. It'll be a lousy experience. So the same principle applies. What teachers could then do is, if they find the principals are not stepping up or stepping in, what they could look at doing is forming a little cohort amongst themselves. Reach out to SADAG, reach out to other foundations, reach out to ourselves as HLC, and we will then support you with giving you the basics on tools, information, and access to the right information so that you could pass that information on, so that you can skill yourself to skill the kids, but also to identify certain behavior patterns and then know what the point of call would be is to refer the children to, and their parents, obviously.
Now, Ronald, earlier on you touched base on the role of social media when it comes to, especially like you mentioned, cyberbullying. It's something that really most of the time happens on social media through, posts, through disagreements on something that, to each their own. I want to now understand in terms of how do we then come in and, assist in allowing these young individuals who are on social media, being mindful to the fact that, you can literally cause someone to want to, unalive themselves because of the things that you're saying, and also just to get rid of the cyber or just minimize the cyberbullying that's taking place currently on social media.
That's such a politically correct statement, unalive. They want to kill themselves and commit suicide, right? This is what it pushes them to. So here's the thing with social media. Social media on its own is not controlled by the platforms, it's controlled by the users. So the awareness amongst the kids that have access to devices and on social media is so important. Because you cannot control what they're doing on the screens. Parents could try to access their phones and track it. Trust me, they know ways around, jigga ways around it. They know these things. So you need to sit with a lot of education within the users themselves. And not just education like be careful of this, be careful of that, don't say this, don't do this. Because there's no association with regards to how I feel. If you bring it into immersive learning, now that is a very big thing that's happening in the world right now. Immersive and experiential learning. How does that make you feel when this is said to you? How does that make you feel when this is done to you? Now, if you take social media and follow those trends that are happening, those trends are leading to kids being killed, kids being injured, and kids literally chasing that immediate gratification and that dopamine release of how many likes, how many this, how many that, how do I push the boundary to become entertaining rather than become relevant to self. If you take that with AI, now we're talking about a biryani here that's going to burn anyone's mouth, because AI could mimic your head on my body with our producer's voice, with something else, and it will look like it's real. It'll mimic WhatsApp messages and so forth. So awareness and education to parents to understand the technology, stakeholders at schools to understand it, but ultimately the users to respect it. And what it can do to build and what it can also do to break is absolutely important.
Ronald, you know, it's never always enough time when we're having conversations, because we speak all the time on wellness, and unfortunately we've run out of time. But thank you so much, you know, for coming in today and just sharing with us the conversations around, you know, mental health with the school-age children as well as the youth themselves, and how we, be it a stakeholder or parent, can now become proactive in making sure that all is well, because they are the future, by the way.
They are the future, and we need to look after the future. So don't focus on the seeds, focus on the soil, and the seeds will, of course, flourish on their own.
Thank you so much, Ronald, once again.
Absolute pleasure.
Viewers at home, that was Ronald Abvajee sharing in the importance of us taking action in assisting the conversation and spreading the awareness around mental health conversations, because at the end of the day, hindering the youth now is going to really speak to the future we have tomorrow. But that's where we close it off for now. Let's head over to an ad break. See you when we come back.